My monastic name is Tenzin Namsel.
And where are you from originally?
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area.
How did you come about this journey?
Basically, when I was in my teens, I was exploring a lot of different spiritual traditions and styles of meditation. My mother passed away when I was 16, so in 1996. And so from that sort of triggered a process of self-reflection, also interest in sort of spirituality, slowly. And so eventually I just came to sort of, I think I ran into a book on Tibetan Buddhism, and I was in college in Boston at the time, and I think I was 19 or 20. And so I just sort of blew me away. I checked out different things and felt the power and truth of a lot of things, but then I didn't have something specifically where it was a path that I wanted to follow until I actually started reading about Tibetan Buddhism, and it really sort of woke me up, I guess you could say.
So your sect of Buddhism is Tibetan?
Yeah, in Tibetan Buddhism we have different schools within that.
Can you go into some of that for us?
Yeah, generally we have four main traditions of the Sakya, Kagyu, Nyingma, and Gelugpa, and then another tradition called the Jonangpa, and then there's also the Bun tradition, which is the original or traditional, more shaman-based tradition within Tibet, the native tradition. So it originally was very similar to Native American traditions and other shaman's kind of a word that's used a lot, kind of loosely these days. But it was just the native tradition before Buddhism came. But also they have aspects that are very similar to Buddhism. So the Bun tradition thrives today and has a very similar look and feel to Tibetan Buddhism.
And there are different types of Buddhism. There's Zen, and can you go into some of the different types of Buddhism that there are?
There's basically Buddhist Shakyamuni, more or less, 2,500 years ago, a little bit more now. The story goes he left the palace and then went on a path of searching out enlightenment and studied with different teachers, and also practiced as a yogi and eventually attained enlightenment. And then he was asked to teach, sort of, okay, you understand what we call the nature of things, so please teach that to others. And so he went forth and gathered disciples. They sort of naturally gathered around him, and eventually it became larger gatherings of monks and nuns, as well as lots of lay disciples and patrons. And then that tradition slowly spread over time into other regions within, present-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc., into the Himalayan regions, and then into China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, etc., right? Mm-hmm. So all those traditions have a specific, where the lineage, the Buddhist lineage in general came in a certain way, and then they have their own expression of that and their own sort of way of working with those practices and lineages. And some of the lineages went only to certain places, like for instance we have a lineage called Vajrayana Buddhism that ended up mostly in Tibet and the Himalayan region, though there are aspects of it in Japanese culture and things, so it probably existed in other places originally too. Yeah.
So would you say that in Christianity there's like Catholicism, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Baptists, and all of this is the same way that Buddhism works? It has different sects that worship or follow. Is worship a word to use?
Sure.
So Tibetan is your particular...
Yeah, and Tibetan Buddhism is made up of also lineages that came in and were brought in by certain practitioners and yogis and scholars, and then they're preserved in certain sects.
So you've talked about Buddhist nuns and monks and then lay people. Can you take me through maybe your own process to kind of walk me through the steps? You were a lay person that was a Buddhist first. Is that true?
And the word lay is a little bit tricky because I think it means someone who doesn't know anything, right?
Okay.
So I was trying to think of the other word I wanted to use, which is we sometimes use the word a householder practitioner, because it's someone who isn't a monastic. They don't have a vow of celibacy, and they can marry, but they're still a practitioner. So sometimes the word lay can be a little misleading. So maybe householder is a better word. So
So in
So when I
yoga,
was a householder practitioner, wondering when I was,
how you walked the path to become a monk.
yeah. So like I said, when I met the Dharma, more or less when I was 19 or 20, I started, getting involved with a teacher there in Boston, a teacher named Geshe Tsoga, who since passed away, and he was the head teacher at a center right outside Boston in a town called Medford. So I got involved with him and his students, and would study there and still go to classes. And I was a musician, so I was studying music. In general, what we study is the sutras coming from the Buddha and his disciples, who actually wrote them down, or they got written down later. The sutras and the commentaries on those sutras. So that's kind of the succinct way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
But that we studied, and we studied a lot of modern the word modern is kind of funny here because it's like written by a Tibetan scholar maybe in the 14th century, but that's still modern compared to the time of the Buddha. So anyways, we would study more modern commentaries, or you could say Tibetan commentaries on sutra and the topics that the Buddha spoke. Yeah. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, and these are the truth of suffering or the truth of pain, if you want to use that word instead. It's that we experience pain in whatever degree we experience that. Ultimately, we have to die, which is painful because we have to let go of everything. So the Buddha, this was the first noble truth, and then then the Buddha elucidated on the cause of that there's an actual cause for that suffering. Therefore, by talking about a cause for that suffering, then the third noble truth comes, where you can actually eliminate that suffering or pain. And we do that through the path of, sometimes they delineate it in an eightfold path in the Tibetan tradition. We surmise it in, I don't know if that's the right word, but we
Condense?
Yeah, we condense it into training in ethics, training in concentration or meditative concentration, and training in wisdom, which is an investigation and ultimately a direct experience into how things actually exist. It's the nature of reality. So from a Buddhist perspective, right? So that's generally the framework that Buddhism. Basically, when it comes down to it, I think a lot of religions have things in common, and it's more helps to focus on what those are in common. Yeah. There are differences, but that's okay too. And I think His Holiness Dalai Lama, who's one of my teachers, I got my monastic ordination from him.
Wow.
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he kind of delineates into three. Let's see if I can remember them. So the Buddhist science and the Buddhist philosophy, that can be practiced and studied in whoever's interested in that. You don't have to be specifically Buddhist. And then there's the third aspect, which is the Buddhist religion. And that's for someone who wishes to pursue, be a Buddhist and practice in that way, in relationship with it as a religion. So I think that's quite skillful because it leaves it open where the Four Noble Truths, things like that, and also the various ways those are sort of elucidated on, and the many texts we have in Buddha Dharma, those can be studied and people can be benefited by those. I mean, you could see it now where mindfulness meditation is like a huge movement within America and other countries. So, they're borrowing from Buddhist meditation and applying it to a secular, way. So there's a benefit there. So then people are interested in the Buddhist religion. This is where faith and belief and these kinds of things get involved. Yeah.
You had used the word Dharma. Would you like to give a definition of Dharma so that people understand what the word?
How much time do we have? I'm just joking. Dharma is like a kind of a loaded word, yeah? Yeah. It can mean just the literal teachings themselves. Mm-hmm. We'd call that like Dharma of Scripture. Mm-hmm. It could also mean it can talk about, Dharma can mean phenomena. It can also mean the nature of that phenomena. So, and then ultimately we also have the Dharma of Realization, which is the experience of the Dharma in its full manifestation that exists within the minds of practitioners who have realized that. We're talking about, the Buddha and people like that. Yeah.
To go deeper into the monastic lifestyle. Yeah.
And now I remember your original question. I think it was kind of a natural process. I was actually drawn to it right away. So as soon as I started reading some, modern Buddhist commentaries by sort of Western authors, and also different sutras, and just reading more material and getting access to what the monastic life was like a little bit. I immediately had a what do you call it? Just a habit that I liked that. It didn't come from anywhere. Buddhism, we say it came from somewhere, but it didn't come from anywhere in that moment. Just
it resonated.
Yeah, and so and like I said, so when I met a teacher, I also I have many teachers that I've studied with, and when I met one of my other main teachers, I kind of communicated that to him, and he said, "Sure, if you want to do it," and we talked about it. I was still in college, so I communicated that, and he said, "Sure," and he kind of left it up to me. And so I thought about it more, and I decided to wait because I wanted to finish college, and I also just wanted to be a young 20-something and just, enjoy and have fun, whatever that means. It's questionable from a Buddhist perspective if I actually had fun. That's a whole different thing. So, anyways, so yeah, and so in that time, I stayed in Boston a little bit longer, and then I ended up moving back to the Bay Area where I'm originally from, San Francisco Bay Area. And I was a musician, and I was a recording engineer, so I recorded bands, and I worked for a record label a little bit, and I was trying to build a music career there, and still engaging in my daily practice and going to teachings with teachers there, and my root teacher would come from time to time, and and then I went on a retreat, I think in Vermont, and the wish came back really strong, and I just felt like I was kind of not satisfied, like something wasn't fitting, and I felt like it was like you're trying to move, but there's a truck on top of you, so you can't do anything. And even though I was pretty consistent with my daily practice and doing retreats, a retreat is where we go into seclusion for a period of time and practice more intensely, where it becomes like our full-time job. Yeah, and we practice for 6 to 8 hours a day or more. Yeah, and you do prayers, there's certain chanting, there's also meditation, the way most people think of meditation. There's all different kinds of things, because meditation is a little bit of a loaded word, and the word is losing its meaning a little bit in our culture, because someone can call meditation anything these days. No judgment of anyone. Mm-hmm. Just it has a specific meaning within Buddhism.
And what is that?
Well, the word gom in Tibetan, I like to use that as a term. It means to familiarize your mind with a virtuous object. So that's literally what it means. If we're going to meditate on the Four Noble Truths, we're going to meditate about the nature of things, in the sense of things being impermanent, that they change. So we use that as an object of meditation, and then we bring through mindfulness and awareness, we bring our focus onto that meditation, and then we contemplate. So this is what's called they use the word analytical meditation, but I think you could also say contemplative meditation, where you're using thought, but you're using it in a skillful, kind of virtuous way to meditate on impermanence. And what that brings about eventually is a real feeling of impermanence over time. And then you rest in that feeling, and you repeat this process over and over until it actually shifts your mind. So that's one style of meditation. Of course, a more popular style is to sit and watch your breath. That's also that's what we call shini meditation, which is calm abiding in English. It means to calmly abide. So you're bringing the mind and settling it. Yeah.
And vipassana.
Yeah, vipassana actually means insight meditation. So in my tradition, when we have different paths of vipassana meditation. Some are analytical, like where you'd be penetrating into the nature of something. For instance, does something exist in a singular, independent way? So we use our thinking to sort of penetrate that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Another version is to meditate just on the mind itself. So this is more of a less analytical way, but it's also a vipassana meditation. Yeah. So this is where shamatha is more or calm abiding meditation is more where you're focusing single pointedly on an object to both bring about a settled mind and also have the flexibility of mind, or the pliancy to be able to put it on an object, and it doesn't. If you're like me, then you can see that the mind goes everywhere all the time. So when we practice calm abiding meditation over years and years and years, our mind will eventually settle, and we can focus on one thing. And then we actually use the power of that to investigate the nature of reality. And that's where the Vipassana comes in. So we end up unifying or meeting shamatha and Vipassana eventually over time. I was weighted down and I couldn't engage the Dharma in the way I wanted to engage it. And so I really felt like a monastic life would give me the means to do that. And mostly what it is time and actual freedom. And that's what I found, you have a lot of time, for better or worse. So sometimes, so obviously it's better, but you know what I'm saying. So, well, for me, it's been great. Generally in Buddhism, one of the main things we're trying to do is really work with our experience, work with how are we relating to our experience right now, the way the projections of our thoughts, whatever our emotions are happening, and we're really working with them in as much of a skillful way as we can to mitigate or sort of not engage in what we call, this is a tricky word because when you say non-virtue it triggers things for people, so I'm just not thinking of the modern word I like to use, but basically we're trying to avoid non-virtue, and then we're trying to adopt virtue. So again, Buddhism has its own framework for what this is, but it's in common with a lot of other traditions and religions. And you could also say, in a way, some of it is definitely in common with just what makes us thrive as human beings. Like not being mean to each other is, engaging in virtue when we're patient with each other. And so a non-virtue would be for instance, abusive speech. So abusing someone, yelling at them, berating them, insulting them. And the virtue would be patience for maybe that person triggered something in you. So instead of practicing, again, it's going to come up. If you're like me, you're going to want to yell at someone from time to time, Absolutely. So then the practice is we get to know our mind. And by mind, this is a combination of a lot of things, but in general, we get to know our emotions, we get to know our thought patterns. And then through meditation, we're able to become more aware of how those express themselves, and we're able to become aware before we open our mouths and say something stupid, Right. And then we apply the remedy of patience, So this is just one example, but of course there's many of these, right? So that's just one example of avoiding non-virtue and adopting virtue. So as a monk, it's sort of the monastic life itself that's what they say it's for. You're because we have a certain set of precepts that we abide by, and then those help to create a container for then how we interact with others, how we interact with our mind, all of that. Yeah. Buddha established a sangha, which means a spiritual community. It refers to both householder practitioners and monastic, but in that time it referred more to the monastic sangha. Yeah. So he had, as things grew organically and more disciples came, rules. I don't know. Rules is kind of a funny word. I would say like
structure.
Structure or containers started to form more, and this is what we call the Vinaya. So this is the Vinaya within both monastic and householder practitioners. We both have a type of Vinaya or container, boundaries to actually, and they serve as a way to help us gain depth in our practice. Because otherwise, it's actually for a beginner to then start to have some sort of framework. Like if you put yourself in a room with certain things, you're going to have a better chance of interacting in a virtuous way, depending on what you put in that room. Like if you put me in a room with internet, there's a greater chance I'm not going to meditate. So that's a bit of the problem. So anyway, I'm just using that as a modern example. So what was my point?
The beggar's bowl. We were going to the container.
So the Buddha, that was one container that came organically. So they would. It was a tradition already, I think, in India among yogis, where they would beg for their meals, and it offers a lot of opportunity for the practitioner as well as the person who's giving. So again, we have this process of virtue and non-virtue, where the person who's giving can practice generosity, which is another virtue, right? So.
So that is a tradition that you partook in as well.
So Tibetan Buddhism doesn't do that, and the reason why, mainly, I think, so that tradition went more to Thailand. So in Thailand, they uphold that very strictly, and they're also very traditional in the way they hold the Vinaya, which is quite amazing when you go to a monastery and you see it. In Tibet, the climate was so cold, and they're up there at 18,000, 20,000 feet, depending on where you are. It was so cold that it wasn't possible to do that and make that a tradition. So it actually became more of a tradition of monastic centers holding a lot of wealth of the area, and people would help, and the monastic center would also serve the people. So it was a reciprocal, priest and patron kind of relationship. It was a monastery, so you have monks engaging in study, debate. So there's a lot of dialectic sort of things in Tibetan Buddhism, and they engage. It also has a very scholarly aspect to it, where people engage in extensive study over 10, 20 years sometimes, and debate. And what this does is it's also a way to shift habits and to slowly change habits over time for the person, and also a way for someone to become what's the right word? Self kind of sustaining, where their understanding grows due to this kind of engaging in logic and debate. So that's one aspect. Those are aspects of monastery, and they also have meditation and retreats and ritual practices and all sorts of stuff. And they would serve the householder community with funerals, things like that, teachings. And then you had other traditions in Tibet that were non-monastic of yogi, householder yogis who were wandering yogis throughout Tibet, or lived in caves and remote places and did practice. So you had a really rich culture of Dharma embodied, I would have to say. Yeah, it was embodied in the culture. And it was both monastic and non-monastic, and you had all kinds of practitioners. But in a monastic way, that's how they would spend, more or less, depending on the monastery, but more or less that's how they'd spend their time. Yeah, and so the food was just there. So they practiced begging in the sense of they weren't earning money to buy food. People were offering the food, but they weren't going out the Theravada tradition. So they've upheld that specific Buddhist tradition.
And what is the difference between a Buddhist nun and a Buddhist monk in the Tibetan tradition?
There's not really a difference. I mean, there's difference. We have different levels of vows. So, for instance, like I said, this is the Vinaya. So we have levels of vows for householder practitioners, and then we have vows for what's called a novice monk. So I'm a novice monk, or a novice. If a woman was a novice nun. There's a bit of a difference, but not much in the vows. And then we have fully ordained monks and fully ordained nuns. Right now in the Tibetan tradition, they don't have a tradition of fully ordained nuns as much, but it's starting to shift, and things are starting to move there. We're not sure, but the tradition could have been lost. That's why there's a bit of a shift, and there's debate around that. But in the Chinese tradition, they do have still the fully ordained nuns' vows. So those are the categories, more or less. There's a few other subcategories, but those are the categories of vows. And what it really means between a novice and a fully ordained monastic, be they a nun or a monk, it's just the amount or number of, I would say, boundaries or containers that we take on. Yeah.
And are you going to be pursuing
being a fully ordained monk? Mm-hmm. Usually after 3 years. As Westerners, often a lot of us take vows late in life, just because we didn't grow up with the religion. So usually in Tibetan Buddhism, it's changing a little bit now. But monks will be, really young. They'll start, and then when they're older, they can choose if they want to continue or not. When they reach 18, now in Nepal and India and other countries, you get all different ages. Some come in at 13, 15, or something like that. Both nuns and monks, and you still get the young ones. For Western monks, usually after 3 years, we would take full ordination, just because it's we're older. So by that point, you choose if you want to. For me, I've just stayed a novice. I've been a novice monk 7 years. So, I mean, I hope to one day. It's not really it's something I aspire to, but I'm not in a rush, kind of. Right. So the whole point is to be able to transform our minds. The whole point is to be able to transform into individuals who can benefit the world more. From a strictly Vinaya perspective, the point is to become liberated from this is where we have in Buddhism something this is very specific to Buddhism, where we have this aspect of, like the Buddha taught, you have this aspect of the truth of pain, that we go through different levels of pain. Ultimately, we have this suffering or pain described from Buddhist philosophy of going in circles again and again and again, and having to be reborn again and again and again into different embodiments where we have different, levels of temporary happiness and then some pain sometimes. But ultimately, from a Buddhist perspective, even those temporary small happinesses or states of happiness are fleeting and don't actually fulfill us. So I'm still testing that out, by the way. So I'm not saying that as a definitive thing from my perspective.
Right. Right.
I still like donuts and all that kind of stuff, So I'm testing a lot,
You're easing on into
maybe like the millionth time I'll learn,
Right.
But anyways, so, and that's due to habit, So from a Buddhist perspective, we're trying to liberate ourselves from that bind or being bound to that circling. That's the whole point. And then from what we call the Mahayana Sutras, we're trying to do that in order to actually become a free being or an awake being, an enlightened being, in order to be able to benefit beings better. Because it's just like being more of a skilled doctor. So that's sort of the worldview a little bit within Buddhism. But some people kind of view it as fatalistic, and it's really not. It's just the Buddha saw, this is the religious perspective, but the Buddha he saw how things are, and he was just commenting on things, how they were. He wasn't like trying to make up a religion or something like that. So I think that's a little bit, and some people like to say Buddhism isn't a religion, it's a science or something like that. And yes, it has science, but it's also religion, there is a belief system. And I think from a Buddhist perspective, that's from an individual practitioner, that's open to investigation. That's what's so beautiful about it. It's kind of overused these days, but there's this famous quote from the Buddha where he said, it's a foolish person who just reads my teaching or hears my teaching and sort of just believes it right away. He said a really wise person treats it like as if they're investigating gold. So they're going to rub it and do certain processes to it to see if it's real gold. So that's the process. So I feel, and then what's so skillful about that I've found is that process actually, that makes you mature. Because through that, it's not like you're trying to prove to yourself, this is the tricky thing sometimes when we approach a religion. We go in the West, especially in Eastern religion, we want to go in and we're usually excited by it or something, it's like mystical or something excites us. And so it's easy to just sort of like, okay, I don't need to investigate. Because we have an issue in our culture with working with doubt. We have a really dysfunctional relationship with doubt. Doubt isn't the best mind state, it's kind of confusing, but I would say blind faith isn't necessarily encouraged. You're encouraged to really check, and I've found over time the benefits of this checking and analyzing is really for me. It's not for anyone else. It's for me, where we grow through that process because we come to more conclusions within ourselves that aren't they're not a religion. It's just the way things are. But of course, when we talk about it, we have to talk about it from that perspective. You see what I'm saying?
As a Buddhist monk, what are your responsibilities? What are your obligations? How are your daily needs provided for?
So like you said, so traditionally, like monks would go begging, right? So I don't go. I do sort of digital begging these days. Is what I do. Our situation is pretty unique here in the West for American Tibetan Buddhist monks or Western Tibetan Buddhist monks. There are, in the Theravada tradition and Chinese tradition, they have some monasteries here for them to live, and it's wonderful. In the Tibetan tradition, we don't have so many yet in America per se. So a lot of my friends, they end up going to Asia, and they study in India at some of the Tibetan monasteries that exist there in exile, or Nepal. I've sort of, due to my teacher's advice, I've stayed here and I engage in more solitary retreat throughout the year. And so my path's a little different. It's a little bit odd. It's not necessarily, I think monks should live in a monastery in general, so mine's a little bit different.
But you teach?
Yeah, so I do teach in the States a little bit. I'm part of an organization called Pundarika, so I help the organization a little bit. My teacher, Sokni Rinpoche, so I'll help with reviews and stuff at retreats, and also help the students if they have practice questions. And then I'll be invited to teach a little bit here and there. And then my own studies, it's a lot of self-study these days, and then throughout the year, I'll travel to engage with my teachers and to continue those studies. Or I'll travel to Asia and continue my studies that way. And then I'm supported by really kind people, who, my situation is actually pretty, what's the word? I think I've been really lucky. Because a lot of us Western monastics in America, we struggle a lot, especially some, they have to continue to work. And so they're not wearing their robes at work. And they're basically living, householder life, and then they come, and they try their best, and they engage with whatever community they can and study and things like that. And I think that's still wonderful, but it's tough. So I've been a little bit lucky where I've had people have supported me over the years, just financially, so I can eat and I can live. And where I live now, where we're filming, it's my teacher's house, and the organization's house, so they let me stay in, and that supports me, because definitely rent is like probably the biggest bill.
Right.
So with that out of the way, I live off very little money a year. If that, I can live off, I don't know, I'm not gonna say, but it's not that much. Just because I keep my costs really low.
Yeah.
I don't drive, things like that.